perfect position to do so, but just so if Rin is not on the call, or
Rin. Yeah,
over
Rin.
to you, sir.
Okay, sure. So, sorry, I just dropped in late. I had like a session I was just finalizing. I just did it like previous minute. Otherwise, I'm so glad Tobi got to honor this. Yeah, Tobi is a debate coach. Last time I was on a call, and yeah, we had Chinese counterparts in that regard. So I'm most likely thinking he's like an academy. He's most likely developing that side, anyways. So I'm just glad he's going to be sharing his insights on the same, and so I'm most likely thinking you need to give him like your most attention from his speaking experience to adjudication. He's just like a down to earth person. Thank you, Tobi, again for coming through. Otherwise, I think over to you. We just like have some people joining in the due course. The session will be recorded, and so I'm sure there will be like minutes to the same, so they'll be able to track through. Otherwise, Tobi, you're most welcome.
Can I confirm you can hear me?
Yeah, you're clearly audible.
All right. First, I want to thank Rain for the opportunity. I want to thank the university and the host for opportunity to be able to share my insights within the sport. I am so sorry I will not be able to share my screen. So I prepared a very comprehensive slide and then I sent it to my phone. But I left work so late and then I left my laptop at the office. So I am so sorry I might not be able to share screen. But I think after the sections, if you need the slide, I might send the slide to you. Yeah, so I'm going to be sharing a little insight into debating from what I have garnered over the years. It's going to range from the act of framing and framing most especially, but the first half of this conversation is usually going to be on argumentation, the skills you need in argumentation, what judges give priority to in argumentation. As somebody myself that I've broken in maybe all of the majors, except like all of the majors I had participated in, because when I was in the African continent, I had broken at all of the competition on the continent. When I moved to Asia, I had broken in UADC, which is Asia's biggest tournament. I had broken at the speaker, and I was the second best speaker at GDC that's 2 months ago, one of the biggest debating competition in China. So I think this section is going to be insightful in terms of the experience, but it's going to be practical in and of themselves. That means we're going to walk through different motions. I'm going to ask so much question because I told Rain that am I not just going to make it a lecture section? It's going to be so much of a interactive section because I think this gives us practical ability to use those experiences or conversations we are going to be learning from this section. My approach to classes most times is the fact that if we make it too theoretical, people tend to forget. But if we constantly practice them, it just becomes a skill that we consequently work or use alongside. The last thing I'm just going to say before I start is if we are comfortable or in places where we can turn on our cameras, I'll be so delighted to see one of you persons turn on their camera so I don't have to stare at the blank screen all the night. Yeah, thank you so much. Outside that, this walkthrough section, okay, I think someone is raising their hand. Okay. Oh, all right, let me just continue. So in this particular sections, I'm going to divide this section into 6 sections. The first section, we are going to talk about argument generation. The second section, we are going to talk about argument structure. The third section, we are going to talk about refutation generation. The fourth, we are going to talk about refutation structure. Then we are going to talk about weighing metrics. And then if time permits us, we are going to talk about framing. I think this section is supposed to be 2 hours. I'll try and choke it into like an hour and a half because my time zone is very different. This is 12:08 a.m. GMT plus 8. So that I might catch some sleep. So I'll be productive at work tomorrow morning. So let's start from arguments generation. In this particular section, we are going to first talk about stakeholders. What are stakeholders in debate? When we talk about stakeholders in debate, so if you see emotion, the first intuition pump is you can talk about the stakeholders. Who is affected? How are they affected? What are those stakeholder incentives? What are the capacity of that stakeholder? We are going to talk about comparative. What is comparative? What is the realistic being compared on the other side? We are going to talk about lateral engagement. What is the other side likely to run? And how can we engage that other side material? And we're going to then just talk about the dump it down and all of those things. Okay, thank you so much for turning on the cameras. Thank you so much. In terms of the material, I'll give so much credit to Ria. All right, let's talk about stakeholders analysis in terms of argument generations. So when we see motions, the first thing is we can examine which stakeholders are affected. So the first question that comes to our head is who is affected by this motion? So with this question, we can ask ourselves, where does this debate take place? We can like critique the different scenarios that we can imagine where stakeholders but you can further break this particular 4 unique actors to different sects. So you can critique the role of one, poor women in that debate. You can talk about liberal women. You can talk about trans women. We can talk about black women, how the motion impacts them. You can talk about conservative women. You can talk about moderates. You can talk about feminists. You can talk about the leftist and the progressive. So stakeholder analysis arguments in debate is to just examine who do this particular motion impact the most, and then you make sufficient arguments regarding regarding those particular actor. I'm just going to read one more and then see if we can outline stakeholders. I'll just ask a random question if we can unmute ourselves and tell us stakeholders that are involved in this form of motion. So if the motion is, this house would mandate that in every electoral cycle, no more than 50% of politicians, this house will mandate that in every electoral cycle, no more than 50% of politicians from every okay. Okay, let's assume the motion is, this house prefers a world where people predominantly believe that free will does not exist. This house prefers a world where people predominantly believe that free will does not exist. You can just put it in the chat space, or you can unmute yourself to tell us who you think are stakeholders within this particular debate. This house prefers a world where people predominantly believe that free will does not exist. Can I confirm you can hear me?
Yeah, you are audible. You're audible.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yes. So we've talked about stakeholders. We started by talking about stakeholders, and then we talk about stakeholders within motion. So I'm asking us a general question. So if the motion is, this house prefers a world where people predominantly believe that free will does not exist, what do we think are major stakeholders in that particular debate? So in this particular debate, we can talk about religion, how this motion influences religion. We can talk about another stakeholder is the people. How does it influence people? The both sides can take court system, how this is going to influence the judiciary or the criminal justice system. So the CJS is an important stakeholder, and then how it impacts government. So these are how to generate arguments in debate. You're able to examine which stakeholders are important in the debate, and then you can weave your arguments around those particular stakeholders, so you get like that important argument that is debate winning and that can change the dynamics of the debate. So in terms of religion, you can talk about religion leaders, why this makes hateful religion, why it changes religion narratives, religion conflict, and all of those things. So those are the most important thing. A very practical example was the motion at GDC. So GDC is a prestigious Chinese tournament, the ninth edition. I think the the debate was about, this house opposes the police, like the preaching of the spread of religion, like the conversion that happens within religion. I think something like that. I'm just paraphrasing the motion. Oh, great. Exactly. Yes. Yes. People who make choices within themselves. That's so great. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes. I think I'm happy that, like, at least we're having so much conversation around this particular discussion. Yes, we can talk about people who make those choices that are important for themselves, in terms of one, people who actors who want to change their body dynamics, people who do not like the way their skin color is, and all of those things. Beautiful. Thank you so much. So the motion itself was, this has regrets or opposes the spread of, like, the posterization of religion. And then opening government intuitively talk about, like, they exclusively talk about why religion itself spreads, like the model where people preach or push religion to other is very, very violent in its nature. The fact that when people do not accept those religion, they are pushed into hatred and all of those things. I told my partner that in the member of government speech, I'm going to run if a stakeholder analysis to engage about the people who get hurt the most. And then I started the debate with a very fancy intro to say, I think I still can't remember, because it's a very, I think I had an 83 speaks in that particular round. I think I started with a fancy introduction about if my my coursemate when I was doing my undergrad, who inherently, whose mother inherently committed suicide because the child wake up and come out of the closet. And then I go ahead to explain that the most important people in the debate are religion follower who intuitively had followed religion for a very long period of time, but are highly disappointed at a stage when they get to know that their child or the person that is closer to them the most cannot convert to that religion. I then weigh and say, opening government talks about violence, but violence in and of itself is not even the biggest religion division. Like religions still curb violence for different reasons. They just do not want people to see them as bad religion. They have incentive not to be violent because people will not even support religion. I talked about how the rise of feminism and other liberal movements is already calling out religion. So religion do not have incentive to use the violent approach to convert people. But then I uniquely weigh that the most important stakeholders are just those people who suffer intuitively in their bedroom and cry every night because their favorite son have not accepted like the gospel in which they preach. Talked about why this is inherently bad for them because religion continue to see them as failure because they can't bring their children to church, or their favorites their cousin or something just comes out of the closet. So uniquely weaponizing on that stakeholder and showing why that stakeholder is important to the debate gave us the unique edge in that particular round. So that's a very sufficient walkthrough of how stakeholders can impact debate. So three takeaway from this particular takeaway section. One, who is directly and mostly affected by this particular motion, who is responsible for implementing those motions, and where does this debate take place and how can we treat them? That is a takeaway on stakeholder argumentation generation. I'll be taking questions after each section because, like I talked about, we have 6 different sections. So if we have questions on this particular section, you can just ask. If not, I'll just move on to the second section, which is comparative. Okay, great. And these situations where we so there are no important stakeholders, and I think this is very, very unique. It's debating. Most times, people credit and say, "Oh, the minority are the most important people in this debate because they need this particular policy most." So, for instance, I have noticed that 80% of the debates that I've listened to, people always boil it down to say the people that are important in this debate are people in Africa who can't get drugs. Or they say these most important actors in this debate are women and all of those things. That is, I think when we get to framing, we are going to talk about the strength of actors. It is just a debate winning mechanism. That's why it's intuitive for you to be able to prove why your actor is most important than the other actor. So there are no stakeholders that are more important in debates. It's depending on the frame, the amount of framing and like a mechanism. It's so much hinge on the amount of framing and mechanism that you can give within the debate. Can Ocon please help us remove somebody that has I think attend to the um call?
You mean someone is unmuted?
Oh yeah, I think some. It's fine. It's fine. We can just go on. We are so sorry for that. Someone can just kick them off the call. Great. Yeah, great. Let's continue. So, the question again. Let me just go on from the question. Yes. So there are no important stakeholder. It's how do you frame the strength of that actor you want to win the debate with? So, like I talk about in the round, in the fifth round motion, in this fifth round motion, I talked about why open government talks about why people who suffer religion violence in terms of the nature in which religion is preached, the violence mechanism, the holy wars had the most affected people. What we did in our debate is to show that the most important actors, stakeholders in the debate are people who subsequently suffers from the inherent harm of not being able to convert people that are closer to them, how religion sees them as weakling, how religion constantly call them out. But even if religion does not call them out publicly, how the constant text of religion to say, oh, there is no heaven if your child is not with you, and all of those things are the most important things. So it's just framing why the strength of that your actor is better. The second thing we are going to talk about in terms of argument generation, how you can generate arguments, is comparatives.
Bartolito era un gallo que vivía muy feliz. Cuando el sol aparecía, Bartolito cantaba así.
Okay, sorry about that. I have blocked him from joining the call again. Sorry about that.
Toby, you're muted. You're muted.
I am so sorry. So what are comparatives? Comparatives are very important to walk through in debate. I actually feel this is so nice. Like I like comparative in debate. It just makes debating easier. So let's do a walkthrough of how you can use comparative to get arguments and then win debate. Let's assume the motion is this house believes that NGOs should not provide humanitarian aid to conflict areas until those areas are stabilized. I'm going to read out the motion again. This house believes that NGOs should not provide humanitarian aid to conflict areas until those areas are stabilized, if that's the motion. And then Gov on their comparative says, oh, the comparative is that, okay. And then God says the comparative is that NGOs can alternatively provide aid elsewhere. And then they prove that, oh, NGOs can provide aid elsewhere, given that NGOs runs on limited budget. However, this alternative can go to places that are more stable. So aid can be easily delivered to those places, and then you lower the risk of bad groups stealing those aids, if that is government arguments within the debate. On up can run, up can then talk about why that comparative is most important for them to win the debate, and then say the comparative within this conflict area is that people are still desperately in need. So even if NGOs do not go there for the reasons government talk about, there is still void for aid within those particular areas. Which means if NGOs do not fill those voids, there are an incentive for other groups to fill those voids. So which groups are going to fill those voids? It's going to be Hamas. It's going to be just technically bad actors are going to provide those particular aids. When they provide those particular aids, it subsequently means you allow them to dominate military power and recruit people from those particular camps. So if God says, oh, this is bad because NGOs should put their fund elsewhere, that the comparative is NGOs should put their funds somewhere. When NGO put those funds elsewhere, because it is stable, they are able to judiciously use that money and the resources. You can use that comparative to generate an argument like we just talked about, like I just explained, to show that if NGOs then say, oh, don't let us put our money here because it is not stable, because we are going to run the risk of it getting hijacked by bad actors, like government talks about, there's going to be a void. Those places are still going to need aid, which means bad actors are going to fill those void, and then we are able to recruit more people because they provide the basic amenities to those people. So it's easier for them to recruit people to join them, and then it's worse for you on the long run. So it's sure, it's so clear that UP is going to win that comparative. But that argument is strictly on the fact that UP relied on Gov to use the comparative they are providing to win the debate. So that is how to generate arguments using the comparative routes. You just take from what they've talked about, and then you show why the comparative they talk about works better in your word, or why it is harmful to their case. So that's the chart on comparative. Yes, do we have any question on that particular comparative chart? Okay. You can unmute, you can unmute, or you can type in the chat space. I just want to ensure that we are on the same page, and then I know that we are following or listening to. Okay. Thank you so much for the thumbs up. I assume there are no questions. So let's talk about lateral engagement or horizontal engagement in debate. So in prep, one question we often ask ourselves as debaters is, what would the other side mostly realistic argue, and how can you engage with that? So you just preempt yourself before the debate starts. What's like the most unique arguments that the other side of the debate is going to argue, and how can we engage that? So in some cases, it just means you are going to think about that argument, and then you need to refute them. In other cases, that means you needed to figure out your vision for the round and how you intend to beat and outweigh other arguments within the debate. I think the second part is what I do mostly in my small speaking career. I just look at, how do I think this debate is going to end? Like, what do I think is going to be the biggest talk about in this debate? This debate is going to be like, why this, maybe this debate is going to be like how you impact minority women. And then I'm going to say, what arguments can I bring to this debate that can influence the decision to my side, of course? Then, based on those two assumptions you've made in terms of what argument do you think the other sides of the debate are going to run, and in other cases, figuring the vision for the round and how you intend to beat or outweigh other arguments, you then need to generate your arguments based on what you think should be round-winning clashes. And secondly, you now figure out how you make your argument optimal so that it affects whatsoever cases that is going to come in the debate. So there are 3 steps to this. Step 1 is, what will they say? Step 2 is, how can you build your case around that? And then step 3 is, how else can you ensure you can't lose to that? So those are the 3 steps in terms of this lateral engagement. Step 1 again is what we say in the debate. Step 2 is, how can you build a case around that they will say? While the last or the 3rd step is, how can you ensure you don't lose to that particular thing? Let's start from what would they say. So imagine it's like, okay, I think somebody's chatting. Oh yeah, we're still going to talk about the difference between framing and characterization. Towards the last part of the class, I'm just going to dissociate the differences between both. So imagine you're in a game show. What do you realistically anticipate the other side is going to talk about, and how can you anticipate where the other team is going to take the debate? So that is what we are going to do in this particular section. So let's assume the motion is this house would allow cities to be held civilly responsible for death that can be ascribed to homelessness. The motion is this house would allow cities, this house would hold cities, this house would allow cities to be held civilly responsible for death that can be ascribed to homelessness. Let's just have a very short discussion. What do we think government is going to argue in this debate? What do we think government is going to argue in this debate, in this particular motion? Like, it's just an open house discussion. Great. Yes, the idea of social contract, government obligation to focus and fix homelessness. Perfect. Let's assume we are all in prep, and then we are trying to see what government team can run on opposition. So we are doing the first thing that we talked about in terms of the practical thing. We are first asking ourselves the question. We are on up now. We are asking ourselves, what will they say? So I think they already indicated in the chat space, they are going to talk about social contract, which is the incentive for government to always fix homelessness. That's the first thing we know government is going to say in the motion. Like, we are all partners. Let's assume we are all partners and then we are in prep on up. What do we still think government is going to say? Just the first thing that comes to our head is like the first average things all debaters will think of in for any motion. So if we see this motion on government, what's the first thing that we think government is going to say? I think somebody gave us a very good insight in terms of social contracts. But what's the other thing government is going to say in this form of motion? I might just continue if so we can use that to keep time or something. Another thing I think government is going to say in the debate is maybe principally proved that governments are morally culpable. Great. Yes. The aspect of democracy, people trust government to legitimate and do this. Yes, I think that's an extension of the first social contract. Those two are very, very important arguments government is going to run. So that's the second one. Let me just add the third one so we can move to the next step. So let's assume they are going to argue the principle that governments are morally culpable for this death because of their carelessness, because of their laxity, or the fact that they are not just good actors. Now, that is the three things we think they are going to say. The second step after what are they going to say is what can we then do with that? So that's the second question we ask ourselves during prep. What can we then do with that? So we can then prep that into the framing or characterizations we are going to bring into the debate. So the thing we are going to ask ourselves is, how can we win the clash on helping the homelessness as opposition, the homelessness in terms of social contracts? So we can then say, in terms of characterization or framing, in setting up the debate, to say, we think, because we are going to hold them civilly responsible. That means we are going to take them to court. We can then say two things within this speech. One, the idea of civil responsibility means we are going to take them to court, which means in cash-strapped city context, there's going to be expensive lawsuits, and this settlement worsens government's capacity to address the cost of homelessness, because government spends huge amount of money to go to court to settle actors. That's the first context. The second context is the premise of Gov case is that it's when threatened by lawsuit, government is going to respond as well. But it's probably cheaper to respond badly. Like, government, if Gov says governments are bad actors, then we can say because governments are bad actors and they always hate people who trend on their legitimacies. What governments can do is to just criminalize homelessness than to respond to it effectively. So governments can just say, from henceforth, being homeless is a criminal offense. So if we see you homeless, we are going to arrest you. This particular then will drive people away from the street. So are there still homeless people in those communities? Yes. But will those homeless people show up? No, because it is now a criminal offense. So which means you can't then solve government's government says, oh, this is going to help homelessness because there's no incentive for government to act, and then government is going to act. But saying governments have better actors who do not want to feel threatening just means they are going to criminalize homelessness, and then you explain why they are going to criminalize homelessness. They're just going to make a public decree that homelessness is now a crime. So you then do not allow people to express themselves as homeless people, which means you don't even solve the problem. So you see, with thinking about what they are going to say within the debate, you can then frame and context your debate from the beginning so that even when they say that, your framework already responds to it and is already beating their claims within the debate. So we've talked about the first step, what would they say? We've talked about the second step, how to beat that. Yes, that principally is how you can run that. So how can we flip their impact or claim that that impact works for us? How can we wash their material? How can we wash their material? And yes, how can we wash their material? Just a short deviation from that. We can just quickly have a short, before we go to the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth, we can just talk about washing clashes in terms of argument generalization, and then fancy intro. So when we talk about clash washing, I think the first time I was explaining this particular context to a group of folks, that what does it mean to wash clashes within debate? What comes to our head first? So washing clashes is very, very important, especially if you are in the opening half of a debate. So basically, it's just to prove to judges that it's just to wash, like it's as if you're washing clothes. It's just to prove to judges that what they are saying is not important. This is what is mostly important. That is what washing clashes is. Let me give a very good example. So let's assume we are opposition on the motion. This House prefers a world with a norm of serial monogamy, that is a mating culture in which individuals expect to engage in different monogamous pairing through life. That's the info slide. So let's assume government makes arguments that breakup are less painful in their world, since it is more of a norm to end relationship, and it is now socially accepted for people to leave relationships. So breakup is no longer going to be intense. That means Rain is not going to cry when his girlfriend when the girlfriend breaks up with him and all of those things. Maybe that's what Gov argues in the debate. So as opposition, you might just watch that clashes out by explaining that most of the pain that comes with breakup is often internal rather than external. So what I mean by this is you feel bad because you really love and enjoy that person, not because you feel bad because other people make you feel bad. So it's not because the person makes you feel bad, that's why you're feeling bad. You just feel bad because you love that person. So even if breakups up less in Gov world, it is fairly a marginal reduction because breakups still makes you feel shitty, and makes you feel the fact that you lose someone who was meant to you. So that's how to wash out those particular clash. You just explain why you do it better extensively from your side of the house, like why you do it better. Let's take one more example. So on a motion like this, house will make fine proportional to the offender's income. That's we are going to make fines proportional to the income of the offenders. And then gov team, as a gov team, and then they talk about why one potential strategy for this debate will be to wash out any harm like opposition is going to run in terms of how you de-certify criminal law enforcement to stop targeting individuals. So if UP runs an argument about how this is principally unjust, you might run a counter principle argument about how punishments should inflict an equal degree of harm on all people, but how flat rate fine constitutes like a fair low degree of harm to rich people than to poor people, because obviously poor people are going to crime. Like when people pay for crime, it should be unilateral across board. But if I and Bolaji commit the same offense, and then Bolaji is charged, and then we go to court, maybe we drove past the red light, and then the fine is $50 for both sides of us. If Bolaji is a billionaire, and then I am just myself in reality, I'm going to feel so much out of my $50 to Bolaji, who is a billionaire. So it is not principally proportional on two sides of the word, because why me I earn maybe $100 a month, and then Bolaji return is like over $1 million per month. I feel so much blunt because it is 50% of my wages that is going off as fine, while Bolaji is just taking a sipnet of our money, maybe something for morning coffee or something to pay our fine. So in terms of why, if Gov runs that, if opposition says this is principally unjust for people to pay based on income, you can talk about why the metric currently in society is still unjust, because just the rich people do not feel that blunt of that fine. But if it is principally like proportional to their income, so if Bolaji earns $10 million, Bolaji is going to pay the proportion of that $10 million as fine. So maybe she's just going to pay $1 million as fine. Why, if I earn $50, I'm just going to pay $5 as fine. So you can then explain why that is the principal justification and why that is balanced. I think you can wash away all of that government's claim in terms of why it is principally bad and all of the charts they talk about. These are just sidewalk from the discussions we're having. I think another thing that are important as on the roadside is fancy intro. And fancy introductions are sometimes very cool in debates. We're just going to talk that as the last thing we are going to talk about in this particular class. So the next discussion we are going to have is the journey for impact. And this is very, very important. How do you impact debate? The central idea is you can brainstorm impacts that are important, but secondly, that are closely related to the round, and then try to backfill in the analysis. I'm going to explain this. Let's assume we are opposition, and then the motion is this house would pay. Let's assume we are opposition, and then the motion is this house will pay non-gang members to not commit violent crime. This house will pay non-gang members to not commit violent crimes. The first question we ask ourselves on UP is, what impacts can we search for in this particular motion? What are the impacts that we would search for? So the first impact we can discuss, so yes, let's make this a very open section. So what impact can we search for in this particular motion? This house will pay on UP. What do you think are the impact we seek to achieve? This house will pay non-gang members to not commit violent crime? Can I confirm we are together on the call? It makes it look like it's 48 minutes of speaking to myself. Great, great. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Angela. Yes, we can see search for impact around more gang violence. Thank you so much. Let's take another example. If the motion is this house regrets the decline of humanities in universities. Humanities are like humanity studies, apparently. So if the motion is this house regrets the decline of the humanities in the universities, if we are on Gov, what impacts can we look around for? What impacts can we look around for on Gov? If we regret the decline of the humanities in universities, we can talk about how it's improving outcome for students. We can talk about improving important research into societal issues like humanities, why the regret in the decline of humanities in universities means there is no so much research work into important societal issues that are supposed to be done in the humanities aim, and how it doesn't improve outcome for students. Then we can talk about those impacts. The last impact example we can talk about is if the motion is this house regrets the decline of Pan-Africanism, what are the impacts we are looking for on Gov? The decline of Pan-Africanism, if we regret the decline. We can talk about better conflict resolution, improved economic development. We can look at impact of greater political integrations, more foreign aid. Those are important impacts we can talk about. Okay, I think the next thing we are going to talk about is trying to fill in, and it's just a question I think somebody asked in the chat space in terms of argument structure itself. But at the end of the debate, your analysis matter more than anything else. But how you are able to like package and deliver the analysis can amplify the clarity and the persuasiveness of your analysis. There are so many classic formats of arguments itself, like for newbies. Now, some persons talk about claim, warrant, arguments. Some persons talk about thesis, the mechanism, the link, and then the impact and framing. Some persons talk about the uniqueness, the link, and then the impact. So you can always use whatsoever formats that or acronyms that works for you. But the first thing we're going to talk about is, and it's going to be 6, and this is going to be like the last section of this particular talk. Your good arguments, I think good arguments should probably have 6 of these following things. What is the argument doing to prove? That's the thesis. What's the big picture? The mechanism. What's the logic for this claim? The illustration. How does this argument really look or where it works? Comparison. How does this argument create a real delta and change? And then impact. Why should we care about this argument? And maybe framing and weighing. Why is the impact round winning? Why is the debate winning? And why is the metric important? So the first thing is thesis for an argument, which is like taglining or naming an argument. Um, I think there's something I had noticed from most um, good debaters. So so they tagline their arguments in a very, very good way. So taglines should be specific and powerful. For instance, for us to try to avoid saying things like, oh, first argument on the economy or third argument we boost social movement. I think I've seen good speakers say, instead they say, they try to just make their arguments sound more important. So instead of on the economy argument, they can say, we jumpstart the economic developments need to transform this emerging economy. So instead of them to say, oh, we boost social movements, they can say, we equip social movements with the social political power to affect real and meaningful change. Just the dynamics in terms of how they are able to get tagline. Why is this important? Because most times judges often refer back to taglines in their deliberations and adjudication. So you should then make a tagline that reflects what you want the judges to take away in your case. So instead of you to say our first argument is on the economy is a very big complex. It's difficult for the judges to like the judges can say, oh, they run an argument on the economy, but you further help your case if you then say, we like the first argument is the economic development that is needed to transform emerging economies. So that is better because they are able to pinpoint those particular things and they are able to tag that timeline and pinpoint it during deliberations. Yeah, so let's go to outside that. Let's talk about how we can make good timelines or taglines or theses. If you are on opposition, and then the motion is this house supports significant land distributions in non-industrialized developing countries. This house supports significant land redistribution in non-industrialized developing countries. And then we are on up. And your argument is land redistribution will be done poorly. If that's the argument, you can, and then you then say, oh, George, our first argument is to tell you that land redistribution will be done poorly. I feel that's not a very good timeline. You can have a conversation around, like, just you can tagline the arguments in this format. In the context of unaccountability and often corrupt government, land distribution is likely to be done in a non-transparent way, which further widen inequalities and inflame ethnic tensions. That is much of a better tagline to land redistribution will be done poorly. So this tagline is something the judges can just pick up and then they are able to inculcate during deliberations and oral adjudication. So you can say, oh, in the context of accountability and often corrupt government, land distribution is likely to be done in non-transparent, or you can say, Judge, we're going to prove to you that in the context of unaccountability and often corrupt government, the format of land distribution is likely to be done in a very non-transparent method. This is going to further exacerbate inequalities and then inflame ethnic tension. And then you go to your analysis and all of the other four mechanisms that we've talked about. That is a better way. So the judges are able to tag that. So even if they forget all other things in the debates, they're able to know, oh, there was a point in their speech where they mentioned why this is going to exacerbate or inflame ethnic tensions, and like if it's not going to be properly done. So it's a better way to say land distribution is not going to be properly done. It's a better way to say it. Distribution will